work. Excellent. So today we are going to be having a few presentations from representatives of different rare plant community science programs focused on data collection. And I'll take a minute to just expand a little bit on the purpose of this network. We are, Native Plant Trust is one of the first programs in the nation to have a community or citizen science focused project devoted to monitoring rare plant community science. Many other programs have since started up and spread across the US, and for the most part, we haven't been connecting with these other organizations to share knowledge and tools and even look at species trends and how things are changing, especially given climate change. So we partnered with Gretel and Katie from Chicago Botanical Study to do Chicago Botanical Gardens, excuse me, to conduct a study basically looking at the challenges and successes of community science rare plant monitoring projects. And part of this was reaching out to all of these different projects that we could find and surveying how they are doing and what are some of the challenges. This study was actually just published in Frontiers of Conservation, but once the study was concluded, we realized that we had all of these great connections and wanted to capitalize this and continue this moving forward to help share knowledge and skills. So we have since created a leadership committee that is composed of myself, Gretel Kiefer and Katie Kucera, Amanda Weiss, Cheyenne Moore, and Bob Wernerehl, most of which are on this call. But basically, we are trying to structure this as a way to facilitate knowledge sharing between organizations and eventually to start creating tools that can be used by new projects starting up. So with that in mind, I'll quickly turn to look at the agenda. So we have a little bit of time for welcome and introductions. If people would like to unmute themselves, just say who they are, where they're located, and what project they're associated with. We'll then have about 45 minutes for presentations, and we'll have a quick break followed by a discussion. So let's start off with some introductions. So I've been talking for long enough. Bob, would you like to go next?
I'm Bob Wernerehl, state botanist with state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as they like to say. Connected with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program nationally, internationally, I guess. So, yep.
Thank you, Bob. Gretel, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Gretel Kiefer. I manage plants of concern at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Should we call on someone to go next? Would that be a good? All right, I'll call on Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Carrigy. I'm with Washington Rare Plant Care and Conservation in Washington State. I'm the volunteer and outreach coordinator.
That's great. I was just wondering if we had connections with Washington or Oregon or California. So it's great that you're on, because I think your state is pretty active.
Yeah, we have a volunteer program of about 100 volunteers every year doing over 150 reports. So I think we're active. We're not California, but
I had an isoetes shipped to me from Washington because the guy from Massachusetts had moved there, but he still had the plant specimen. And
Anna, could you call on someone to go next?
Oh yeah, I will call on my good friend from University of Vermont, Dan Hale.
Hi, yeah. My name is Dan Hale. I work for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I'm based out of Vermont. And I work with volunteers that are pretty active with monitoring rare plants in Massachusetts. And they actually have been partnering with Native Plant Trust and using their forum. And I'm just interested in learning more about this program and how I could maybe expand that up and down New England where I work. So yeah, thanks for having me and good to see you, Anna. Let's call on Christopher Benda.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Chris Benda, and I work at Southern Illinois University, and this is with Gretel and Katie through the Chicago Botanic Garden on the Plants of Concern program. So they're in the northeastern part of Illinois, Chicagoland, and I'm in extreme southern Illinois near Carbondale. So glad to be a part of this. And I'll call on Amanda.
Hey everybody, Amanda Wise. I am working with the Minnesota DNR. I was formerly part of the Plant Watch program. Derek Anderson, who's on the call as well, is working on that project. I am now working as a regional ecologist for Region 3 in Minnesota, but I still have a lot of interest in this project and generally in community science work for rare plants. So glad to see everybody. Oh, I need to call on somebody. I'm going to call on Derek.
Oops. Thanks, Amanda. Derek Anderson. I work with the Minnesota DNR and the Minnesota Biological Survey, which is kind of our natural heritage program surrogate. And I do work with the rare plants in the state. And we are, as Amanda mentioned, launching a partnership with Minnesota Landscape Arboretum to develop a rare plant monitoring program. So this is quite timely. And I guess with that, I will call on, I see Kevin there is a name I recognize hasn't been called yet. So.
Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Doyle. I'm a botanist with the Wisconsin DNR, our heritage program here, and I coordinate the rare plant monitoring program, which is a community science program in Wisconsin. And I will call on Katie.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all here. My name is Katie Kucera, and I'm the research assistant for the Plants of Concern program at the Chicago Botanic Garden. I get to do a little bit of everything. So I help Gretel manage the database and our monitoring reports, and I coordinate with a lot of volunteers and do volunteer communications and social media, and also get to help with some research and other fun projects on the side. I will call on Suvarna.
Thanks. Apologies for not having my camera on. We just don't have any electricity at the moment. I'm Suvarna. I'm based in Durban, South Africa, and I manage the Custodians of Rare and Endangered Wildflowers program, which is a citizen science program. And actually all of our data collection happens on iNaturalist, of which I'm also co-curating with a colleague. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Suvarna. We're so glad to have an international perspective on rare plant community science at this meeting. Let's see. Diana, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Diana Soteropoulos. I am currently the only state botanist with the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. I mostly work with volunteers for our Arkansas herbarium digitization effort, but I am really interested in the Plants of Concern program and whether we would be able to have one in Arkansas. I don't know that we have the bandwidth with our small staff to manage it. So we do a lot with working with volunteers in iNaturalist observations and extracting those, which has been an interesting process to navigate. But yeah, and I'm based out of Little Rock.
Excellent. I think getting down towards it, Sarah Meyer.
Hello, sorry, I joined a little bit late. I'm the information manager with Massachusetts Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. I work with Bob Wernerehl, our state botanist, and a number of other biologists on our staff. And I manage our online reporting system that we use. It's an application for reporting rare species within the state, as well as overseeing our data team to get our information into our biotics database. So that's my role. And I would pass it on to someone because that seems to be the trend, but because I joined late, I don't know who's left on the list.
Let's see, Savannah, did we hear from you already?
No, when she called on Suvarna, I was like, she just missed my name, but I am a botanist for the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, and I actually work with it's separate in Colorado. It's separate from the state government, but I work with the state government in the Natural Areas Program, where we have a long-standing volunteer steward program that monitors rare plants, among other things. And then also some of my other colleagues at the Heritage Program are working with our Native Plant Society to try and kind of start up some sort of volunteer-led rare plant monitoring network type of thing. So helping, so I think the person representative for that couldn't be here today, so wanted to provide that input as well.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we are recording the session, and we'll be sending out the link to the recording. So if there are other members of your teams that weren't able to come to this, we will make sure that they are able to see this. I think we haven't heard from Mark Brunson.
Hi, yeah, I'm Mark Brunson. I am at Utah State University in Logan, Utah, where we're excited that it's above zero today. Hasn't been for a while. And I teach graduate students about community science. And I also run a small program, an orchid monitoring program for a land trust here in Cache Valley.
I think, let's see, Christopher Benda, did you introduce yourself yet? Oh, Christopher has, and Anna Louise Kuragi, would you also has? Oh yeah, there you go, sorry, didn't tell them.
I think we haven't heard from, I'm not sure of your name, but your Zoom name is Breeden C.
Yeah, that's sorry, Cooper Breeden. My name's Cooper Breeden. I work for Southeastern Grasslands Institute. I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I work mostly on rare plant programs, largely in Tennessee, but a little bit in neighboring states as well. And I also coordinate the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance. So I've worked with our natural heritage program, trying to figure out how we might be able to do a rare plant monitoring program. We haven't quite figured it out yet, haven't done any of it, but we've been talking about it for 2 or 3 years now. So this year I do have some prospects, and I hope that we might just be able to get 1 or 2 pilot projects off the ground. So excellent. Looking forward to seeing these presentations.
That's fabulous. It's wonderful to hear of the new programs that are just starting up. It seems like this is really serendipity, and that hopefully some of us who have been around a little longer can offer some materials and suggestions on how to create your own. So it's wonderful to have everyone here. I think we'll move into our next segment, which is presentations on data collections. So I will be starting this off. I'll share my screen.
Did we get Christopher?
Christopher, were you able?
We did, okay.
Excellent. Okay. So I will be presenting on standardizing rare plant data collection forms. I'm going to begin my presentation just not knowing everyone in the group or your relative knowledge on community science, just with a brief overview of Native Plant Trust's Plant Conservation Volunteer Program and its overarching program, the New England Plant Conservation Program. So in New England, to help protect native species, the Nature Conservancy began partnering with states to create natural heritage programs starting in 1974. The goal of these programs is to assist federal efforts to protect and conserve plants, animals, and natural communities at a state level. Despite the efforts of these programs, Native Plant Trust recognized a serious lack of regional scale monitoring and management of rare plant species across New England. While state governments and natural heritage programs do focus on rare species, they are primarily concerned with species that occur within their own jurisdictional boundaries and often did not communicate with other states. Also, state natural heritage programs use widely varying criteria to determine whether a species should be classified as endangered, and had varying degrees of concern, resources, and expertise to devote to listing species. To address the need for regional plant conservation in New England, in 1990, Native Plant Trust and 68 public and private conservation organizations, including representatives from each New England state, launched the New England Plant Conservation Program, or NEPCOP. NEPCOP is a voluntary collaborative effort designed to preserve the diversity of New England's flora by preventing the extirpation of rare species by promoting their recovery in the wild. NEPCOP has helped craft and provide policy and directions for conservation activities with states and other conservation organizations, banks seed of rare plant species, schedules routine monitoring, and creates management plans for populations of rare plants throughout the region. While the first meetings of NEPCOP in the early 90s were focused on identifying and prioritizing populations needed to determine the status of populations. Before they were focused on seed collection, it quickly became clear that the status of these rare plant populations needed to be determined first before seed collection could occur. With only a couple botanists in each state monitoring literally thousands of populations, there were some populations that hadn't been visited since the early 1900s or even late 1800s. So conservation staff with Native Plant Trust decided that this problem might be solved through the creation of a community or citizen science monitoring program and founded the Plant Conservation Volunteer Program, or PCV program, in 1993. The purpose of the PCV program is to create a baseline of in situ monitoring data on New England rare plant species and populations with the goal of moving towards ex situ conservation with seed collections. The PCV program trains amateur botanists and plant enthusiasts in plant identification, field monitoring, and seed collection protocol. PCVs are able to participate in rare plant monitoring, threat identification, general botanical surveys, and collecting seeds for Native Plant Trust Seed Bank. Currently, our program tracks roughly 27,000 populations across New England from 1,353 taxa. We've trained over, I believe, 2,000 volunteers, roughly 250 of which are currently active. So shortly after its founding, we started with just 15 volunteers in 1993. We quickly spread throughout the remaining New England states. Vermont was the next state to join in 1996, followed by New Hampshire in 1998. The following year, in 1999, the PCV program started in Rhode Island. And finally, we spread throughout the remainder of New England with the addition of Connecticut and Maine in 2000. So while our program is active across all 6 New England states, data collection was fairly complicated because each natural heritage program had already developed their own rare plant reporting form. You can see the headers of these different forms pictured on the slide. While there is a lot of overlap between these forms, they still capture slightly different information and in different ways. This proved problematic for surveyors who would conduct monitoring work in multiple states since we are regional, and it also complicated our ability to transcribe and manage the data in a single system. At the start of the pandemic in 2020, we actually started the process of overhauling our old data management system, which had been created in the mid to late 1990s. So it was about 2 decades out of date and not actually structured to hold transcribed rare plant data. Our new system, the Species Rare Occurrence Utility, or SPROUT, was just rolled out last year. As part of this process, our volunteer data manager, George Kucera, produced a matrix of the various fields present in all 6 New England rare plant reporting forms. From this matrix, we identified the fields with the greatest amount of overlap and added some ones that seemed ecologically or regionally significant. These fields were then used to create a new standardized rare plant reporting form that we've now entitled the New England Rare Plant Reporting Form. Following the drafting of this form, we submitted it to all 6 natural heritage programs for review, and miraculously, they all agreed to the form. So we incorporated their feedback and used the form to begin collecting data starting in 2021. Last year, 2022, we finished creating a password-protected front-end website for SPROUT, where surveyors can now easily log in and submit their data. So for the next few slides, I'm just going to provide a little bit of overview for the New England Rare Plant Reporting Form. So the first section, general survey information, includes 19 fields about the survey and the target population. Each population has a specific element occurrence number, or EO number, that is used to track that specific population by the natural heritage programs as well as our organization. We request that our surveyors report both genets, genetically distinct individuals arising from seed, as well as ramets, or clonal individuals or stems. We also require our surveyors to provide criteria, the criteria they use to differentiate ramets versus genets, since this can sometimes be difficult to do out in the field. One of the biggest difficulties in data collection is making sure that our surveyors have actually located the correct species during their survey. We have 4 fields dedicated to reporting specific diagnostic features used to identify the target species. We are working to ensure that our surveyors collect enough data that Native Plant Trust and Natural Heritage staff can confirm the identity of the species observed outside of the field. So reporting the diagnostic features and also submitting diagnostic photos, clear diagnostic photos. This section also includes a question on observed site previously, which asks the surveyors whether they have seen the species at the site in the past. This can be used to determine confidence in ID if they have submitted an accepted report previously. We also provide 3 fields for surveyors to report GPS coordinates in decimal degrees, along with descriptions for each location. In training, we inform surveyors that if they have any additional locational information or are able to create polygons, they can submit that data in our supplemental files. We have a population information section, which tries to balance qualitative and quantitative data. So we provide a number of fields for descriptions to capture information that may not have already been captured in the form previously. We also request information on phenology, population age structure, elevation area, and whether or not the entire population was surveyed. We have 9 fields to capture some quantitative and qualitative aspects of the surrounding site and plant community, including topographic position, aspect, slope, light, and moisture regime, qualitative comment section for site characteristics, and then areas to list associated native plant species, invasives, and the natural community. In addition to listing the invasives, we have another section for disturbance threats and management. So we have 5 fields for the surveyors to describe anything they observe during their surveys, as well as possible actions that can be taken to mitigate these threats. We have an ecological programs coordinator on staff who reviews the threat data and then works with the states to prioritize sites for management. We have a couple miscellaneous fields to collect any general comments, as well as any owner interactions or information the surveyors may have gleaned during their survey. Native Plant Trust handles all of the landowner research and permissions, but if surveyors reach out to the landowners to coordinate the survey and hear any additional information or have any notes that might be helpful to future surveyors, we create some spaces for them to report that as well. Since some of our surveys do include seed collection to preserve the genetic diversity of New England rare plant populations for use in research and possible augmentation projects, we do have 4 fields for surveyors to report any information on seed collection. At the bottom, towards the bottom of this form, we also require that surveyors upload clear diagnostic features for their target plants, along with maps and any other associated files. And then lastly, surveyors must provide a certification signature, ensuring that information that was provided in this form is accurate to the best of their ability. This is a security feature that was specific to Massachusetts, since it has its own State Endangered Species Act. But since we are standardizing across 6 different states, we needed to make sure that we were in compliance with the strictest state. So all forms have a certification signature. For people submitting data in Massachusetts, there is a legally binding aspect to this, which is included in a comment section beneath this field. So with the new Sprout system, surveyors can enter all of their data directly into our website. While you have seen there are a ton of fields, only a handful are actually required, including survey date, ramet and genet counts, count precision, and diagnostic features. The rest are optional, so the same form can be used if a population is seen or not found. Looking towards the future, we received a lot of feedback from our surveyors. They would like to report survey difficulty or have some way of knowing as they're signing up for populations of survey, since we offer roughly 1,500 surveys a year, about half of which are actually signed up. Our surveyors would like to have more information so they know what they can prepare for in terms of how strenuous a survey may be, or if there's specialized equipment that's needed, such as boats, kayaks, and even climbing equipment in some aspects, in some cases. We also hope to format our front end website so it is more user-friendly on other devices and can be used out in the field. Right now, you can access our Sprout website anywhere. It's just primarily formatted for desktops or computers. So it's a little clunky to use out in the field. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any questions about the process of kind of standardizing rare plant reporting forms. I was actually reminded of this process looking at all of the forms people have uploaded and seeing kind of the diversity.
I have a quick question, Micah.
Yeah.
When you talk about quantifying like survey difficulty or somehow like showing that, would that be something that's like just a text field, like describing, or would it be sort of on a scale? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, so this is a little bit why it wasn't included in the first round of the New England Rare Plant reporting form, is because there's a lot of subjective aspects to this. So one person's difficult, maybe another's easy. So trying to think of kind of more objective ways to describe this. So maybe thinking about, well, is there a way that we could report how far the distance from the parking area to the site, so we could get an understanding of, okay, how much of a trek is this going to be? Is specialized equipment needed? So this is one that's kind of still in development, and we're still mulling over what would be the best way to do this. And then once we hopefully generate a field, we would include that in our survey signups. Again, having 27,000 populations mean it's going to be a little while. If we start this now, it'll probably be 10 years before this field can actually be used, but we are trying to think in advance.
There's also a question in the chat. For all survey locations, do you have ready-to-go information on access and landowner contacts? Are there areas where volunteers need specialized permission or permits?
Yes, so there is all of the information, or in our database, we have locational information. When we have physical copies of reports, these are often digitized, so often surveys that have been with us for a while and have received monitoring in the past will have copies of reports. If we do data shares with the states, they send the information they have, so they will include directions, monitoring history, ownership notes in some cases. Since our organization handles all of the owner permissions for these populations, it's not something the surveyors have to worry terribly about finding out themselves. We do ask them to double check ownership, and we've sent them the kind of tax parcel websites and resources to make sure they know where the boundaries are for the parcels they're visiting, so they don't end up trespassing. But we handle all of the permits and specialized permissions and include those in our assignment materials that we send to the surveyors. So the surveyor just gets all of the kind of EO data or element occurrence data, so directions, monitoring, history, any past forms. They get a page on ownership explaining which landowners we have and have not received permission from, whether they have requests to coordinate the date and time to go out, and hyperlinks to any permits if it is a permitted owner. So we have some permits such as Massachusetts, which are somewhat more specialized because they are just for seed collection with the state. So regardless of who actually owns the property, this permit needs to be included and brought out into the field because they are collecting materials, rare plant materials. I hope that
right. Yeah, you have two more questions.
Okay.
Suvarna, you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks. I just want to check with the seed collecting. How do you bank seeds? And whether you give training for when seeds are ready and when they're actually viable for collection is the first one. And the second one was in terms of resources or rather information, what information do you give? Like, is it journal articles or do you do identification guides that's in a simpler format, flowering times and all of that kind of things? Thanks.
Yeah, so that's a lot of information to cover. So I'll do my best to give an explanation now, and then we can always connect offline and I can give you more information. So we do have a facility that has a seed bank at our in Western Massachusetts, Nasami Farm. So we actually have a seed bank coordinator and seed bank technician who manage those aspects. So I have less information on how that's actually run. I'm more in charge of the coordinating the permits and permissions and making sure people go out and do the collections. In terms of training on species identification and seed collection, we have some general information about seed readiness in our trainings. We also have information on what resources to use to help identify species. But with 1,300 plus taxa, it's hard to include information on specifics. We do have a senior research botanist, Arthur Haynes, who is a taxonomic guru. I still can't believe he's late 30s, early 40s. I think he should be in his 80s with a long white beard. But he always makes himself available to surveyors who have any questions about researching and identifying their plants. But that is something that is one aspect that is really left to the surveyors, is to familiarize themselves with the taxonomic features of their species and make sure that they can key them out when they're out in the field.
Anna has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the conversation about trying to indicate the difficulty of an assignment. We do that for our volunteers with a section with two different parts of our assignment description. One is we have this part called assignment notes, and whenever we get a report back, we put in any data that we get about the access issues, like if you need to go rafting or climbing or stuff like that. So that's a little bit of that. And then we also have a section that we call taxonomy, and this doesn't get rid of any subjectivity, but we rate if it's theoretically an easy to hard ID, and try to give folks that. And we just do it by species or subspecies.
That's really great to know. I think we have some feedback from state natural heritage programs. We classify, so part of NEPCOP is that we have tiered volunteers. So I mentioned NEPCOP, they have a specialized form of volunteers that are task force members that include natural heritage representatives and more of the kind of professional botanists. And then we have plant conservation volunteers. So often, if something is very difficult to identify or particularly sensitive plant, this will be reserved for our task force volunteers. And then if there are any that are kind of still open to PCVs but are more difficult to identify, often we'll include notes or coordinate with natural heritage that'll say, this one might be a little too difficult. I'm sure Bob Wernerehl is grinning because I incorporate a lot of his feedback and notes into our survey comments each year.
All right, Dan has a question.
Sure, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering, how do you determine if it's one single occurrence or multiple occurrences? And like, what's the different distance between occurrences that determines whether you should have one form or two forms? And was it difficult to combine that between the states?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is something that, while we were trying to consider this is something that the states were considering as well. And what's being reached as a consensus is the terminology and kind of key that has been created by NatureServe in biotics. So they have created a key for whether something is an EO or should be classified as a subpopulation. We do have states that have created what they call parent or presidential range EOs, some of which are across entire mountain ranges, which can be very complex to try and bring into a database, especially we're trying to focus on records kind of weighing the ecological information while also making sure that if someone gets signs up for a population, they're not covering a 50-mile area without realizing it. So trying to kind of organize our data so that it shows the ecological information of maybe these populations are related while also being manageable for our surveyors.
Hmm.
And I can try and find that key to send out in our follow-up email. I know I had it open while I was going through newly submitted EOs to us.
All right, so maybe we should save discussions about like defining subpopulations or what is a population for our later discussion and move on to the next presentation. So I think Bob is up next. He's going to present on the survey 123 challenges.
Yeah.
And benefits.
Okay, so you can see the screen. You can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so I'm basically doing two because Cheyenne couldn't make it today, but she sent me some slides. So I'm gonna kind of start with hers because it's a little more straightforward and simple, but this is about our use of specialized software called Survey 123, which we use in the field. So I'll try to make different points as I go along here. Sorry. And I think I first want to start by just I do all this collecting, and you'll see the screen soon. They're basically phone screens that I did screenshots for, but I use a smartphone nowadays for pretty much all my field work, and I wanted to. This application is very useful on a smartphone. You can use tablets, of course, and people do. But when you're pushing your way through heavy brush, which is pretty common, or slogging through a swamp and trying to grab onto a stem of a tree so you don't go too deep into the swamp, you want to have something small. You don't want to have a tablet swinging around you and clattering into the brush and getting stuck. So a smartphone is great. When I did surveys before, I would carry sometimes a radio. I'd carry a little tape recorder for dictation. I carry a full-fledged camera, and I carry a Garmin GPS unit. I can carry one thing now that will take the place of all of those. And if I keep it dry, it works well. There are some downsides. Of course, it needs charging. You have to make sure you have, this is true of some of the other equipment too, but you should carry an extra battery. It's harder to collect data in the rain. Heavy rain would be pretty much out of the question. Light rain, you can usually manage. It's risky for aquatic and wetland surveys. It's hard to see the screen in the full sun. In Massachusetts, we're mostly forest covered, so it's usually not a big issue. You can generally find some shade nearby, but not always. And if you have to switch glasses back and forth, if you wear sunglasses or reading glasses, it can be tricky. You could lose your phone or drop it in a puddle. That wouldn't be so good. And they do overheat sometimes. I have this fairly often. I had to switch to like a white case, so it didn't do this as often. But usually if the phone's overheating, I might be as well. So I could use a few minutes break. And then the worst thing is you can get annoying phone calls during your survey work, just when you're about to snap the most precious photo of an orchid. Your child will call and say, I just got out from school. Where's the food? So anyway, let me go to Cheyenne's survey 123. And she's at a conference today. And so we had worked on planning this together because we both are going to use it. So she couldn't do it. So she sent me these slides. And their application is species specific. So they developed this survey 123, which you'll see in a second, just for this particular species. And when they go on to other species, if they like how it works, well, they're going to design a second one and then a third one and so on. Massachusetts does it very differently, which you'll see. So this is just for collecting on their rare aconitum, reclinatum, ranunculaceae, the highly toxic monkswoods. And they have two populations. And they're also monitoring light as well as several other things. And they started seed collecting and propagation. But one of the main points is that they have multiple people and organizations involved. So they had a need for standardized collection. Survey 123 works in a way that you're collecting locational data at the same time you're collecting tabular data. So this reiterates some of what I just said. They have to work with their foresters, their state foresters. So usually they won't be as skilled at data collection in the same way. So they would need this sort of rigorous set method to do it. Otherwise, you might end up with a lot of DBH data. So the other advantage is that she lists here at number 3, you can, if the survey is not working that well, you can change it pretty simply. And I'll get to that in a sec too. And then it's viewable on your ESRI platforms, ArcGIS Online. Here's some of the, you see the spreadsheet there is actually part of how to build your survey 123. And anybody can do this if you have an ESRI account. You start off with basically these spreadsheets, and on the left, column A, are the defined types of data for each column or each field that you're trying to bring in. Then column B are the names you give it for what you're collecting, and then column C can be the names that will appear on the form for people collecting. Column D, and there's many more columns too, but I'm not showing those. Those can be like hover hints and things like that if people forget exactly what they're doing. If you go online, you can find YouTube descriptions of how to use Survey 123 Connect, that is, to build one of these surveys. And it's pretty straightforward. I just watched a short one on if you were collecting data on UFO sightings. Pretty funny. And then she has 3 sections: the equipment checklist, required questions, and collections. So you can see the equipment checklist on the right there. They need rulers, meter tapes, flags. Now, I'm going to have to ask Cheyenne why her light meters aren't in the equipment, because they come up in the data collection here. And here's their required questions. In this case, because they've focused on a particular species, they can preload these location names, since they're only found in these two places in Pennsylvania. So then the number of non-reproductive, number of reproductives, standard sort of data collection. And then the phenology is a little more complex. Of course, at the top, the number of flowers and fruits, but then, so you can see dormant, emergent, leaf out, vegetative, bud, flowering, fruiting, flowering with abortive bud, fruit dehisced, and senescent there. And then they have the 2 light readings that they would take. So they're going to need some equipment for that. Insect damage, I kind of like that one. And insect damage notes and site notes, kind of standard. And then on the lower right, you can see they click to gather their location. And I don't know what the polygon is, but maybe they can create it or choose it. And then, of course, taking photos. And the next group of questions is on collections. Did they collect tissue? Did they collect seed? Did they collect a voucher? And so that's the segment from Pennsylvania. And I'm going to move on now to our own. And as I said, I use this on a phone. So I just these are all screenshots. You sign in. We have a nice little design. So we have a data staff, thankfully, including Sarah, who's on the call, together with the botany team. And I think there's probably this exists for other tax for other taxa, for the non-important non-plant taxa. Anyway, here's our screens, and to get started here, and you can see in the lower right, you just click that to start collecting data, and then other little boxes will appear down there once you've collected some surveys, and they can be in draft form or they can be in your outbox, so you can then modify them before they get sent. 240 is what I sent in last year, which is a pretty good number. I was in the field a lot. These are our sections. So instead of 3, we have 5 sections on ours, and I'm gonna go through those. But starting with observation details, then mapping, then some of the standard population site info. This is gonna be a little bit similar to what Micah presented. So when we get to some of those details, I'll go through those quickly. We have a species drop-down list because we have well over 500 species, but you can just type in a couple letters and your choices will come up quickly. And you can do negative reporting, which is handy because if you go through your site and you don't find your plant and you can click on that, first of all, it's important data. It's very important because if you survey 3 times and it's not found over, say, a 3-year period or more, will downgrade that element occurrence possibly to historic or even take it off. So, but secondly, you can not fill in a whole bunch of other questions if you have a negative report, and that helps you get through the field work a lot faster. I'm going to focus in on a couple of those screens just to make sure they're big enough so people see. There's the species one, the negative reporting, and then our towns. This is sort of a weird thing with Massachusetts, is that all civic life centers around the 357 or so towns in the state, and everyone, that's how they conceptualize where they live and what happens. So that's apparently important to fill in. And so instead of the 71 counties I used to know in Wisconsin, I've got 300 and some to know here. On the upper right, I put this in because they added a very clever feature. Sarah and our data staff person who works with GIS, Tara Boswell. Once you get through a survey and you're in a place that might have multiple populations, but say you go and you find a clump of 10, but you don't see any others. So you're going to stop and collect data. When at the very end, you can set those as favorite answers and then move on through the site, assuming you're going to find more. And then when you do, you can paste those favorite answers in, and it fills in a lot of the data that you had previously. But you want to adjust, you can adjust then for the details of the specific plant population. So then your typical data quality questions: are you confident of the ID? Was the specimen collected? And then here you can take photos. You can take quite a few photos. They work fairly well. I always take extra on my phone, and then I can put them in later to our records. Your standard population, genets, ramets kind of thing, age classes. And these screens will, once you click on certain things, they will expand to give you more choices. So here's the population structure. And I clicked on percentage, but you can do count. So if you only had, say, 10 plants, you could say I've got 5 seedlings, I've got 3 mature plants, 2 of unknown age or whatever. But if you have a bigger population, you can go by percentage, which is really handy thing. So then your standard reproductive questions: vegetative, bud, flower, seed dispersing, etc. Then our map comes up. Hopefully you have cell signal so you can see it, but if you don't, you can still map the location as long as you have GIS signal, and you have to click on that. That's required, so we get the locational data. Then the population information is more about the size and extent of the populations. Again, whether you surveyed the whole thing or not. And then the vigor of the population. Have you observed it in previous years? What reference are you using? Not all of these, they don't have the asterisks there so they're not required. So you can skip through a lot of them. If you're with somebody who knows the plant better than you do, which happens, you can put in that the that the plant was ID'd by somebody else, and then you can hit person and the fields expand, so you can fill in their last name, first name and email, etc. The site information, Mike has already kind of been through that. I think most of the New England states seem to kind of agree on all these fields, so that was pretty nice. But those things are important. Soil moisture regime, soil slope descriptors. If we do aquatic surveys, we can put in water clarity and depth. Elevation is very important in New England, much more so than some of the flatter states. And geology, if you know what's going on, we get a lot of outwash plains, so I usually put that in the superficial geology. Sometimes you're on a CAME though, or an esker or a drumlin, so that can be pretty cool. Bedrock geology influences a lot of plant communities here. Deer browse we put in, we should really expand that to some other rabbit and we have a lot of geese and swan browse going on aquatic or edge of aquatic species too. Hydrological influence is important, and invasive species threats. Recommendations for other monitoring, the EO number. And then on to the fifth category, the survey information. Did you do a meander survey, or did you do a transect or plots or whatever? The time of day, which will help with the effort, which goes in here. Please tally hours for all surveyors. So tells you exactly how to do it. If you have, 6 surveyors and you do a half an hour, well, that's 2 hours. So you put that in, and that's very helpful to know over the long term, how much effort went into the detection of the rare plants. Then the weather and the temperature, etc. Now, getting off survey 1, 2, 3 for just a sec to end up my little talk here. I'm going to talk about an app that I started using this year for the first time, also on a smartphone, that replaces these clicker counters, which we still have and probably will still continue to use. But this little app called Counter, I don't know if it's on iPhone as well as Android, but I use an Android. I would guess it's on the iPhone as well. Very handy little thing. And you can see here, lower right, storage and cache, 1.2 megabytes, very, very small, little, but incredibly handy tool. And here's what those screens look like. The settings are just a few. You could turn on vibration, tap to increment, and so on. And then at the bottom right, you can see, you can set up several counters, and then you can export all the counters in CVS and clear all the counters, etc. You can have it vibrate as well as make sounds. And they have a huge screen. It's super easy to walk along with this screen and click away. I'm going to actually do it, see if you can hear it. You hear those clicks? Yeah, so it's loud. So even if you got like traffic noise near you or wind, you can, and the buttons are really big. So you can walk along without looking at your phone, looking only at plants, and keep hitting that click, and you'll add up. And so you can see here that you can keep adding counters, and you could do, 4 different plant species or 4 types of plants or more, and then export those. You'd have to switch between each of those. So I think that's all I wanted to say, and except happy surveying. There's lots of cool plants out there.
Thanks, Bob. That's a beautiful photo of Liacheus nova Anglae.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Bob? So Saverna asks, Bob, do surveyors complete all of the fields? Initially, our citizen scientists completed detailed forms, but as years progressed, the level of detailed forms reduced.
Could you say that one more time?
No problem. Do surveyors complete all of the fields? So you showed a lot of fields in your survey.
Yeah, no, they don't. Was there more to that?
She was just explaining that when they started, they had very detailed forms and required the surveyors to fill them all out, but slowly the level of detailed data has been reduced.
Yeah. That's a really good point. No, I could have said it in the beginning, but some of the required fields have a little red asterisk that indicates that they're required. And there's only a handful of those. The rest aren't. So you could, if you had to get through the survey really quickly, you could, and then you could either make a recording and take notes that way and fill it in later on if you wanted to, like say if you were being bombarded by clouds of mosquitoes.
Do you or anyone else have volunteers use survey 123 or just the staff?
Sarah, maybe you could answer that. Are you?
Yeah. So right now it is just for staff because our rare species locations are protected from public records. So we have our own staff version that we've published up, but we have actually offered the framework of the survey 123 to some of our other conservation partners who have their own survey 123 or Esri accounts, so they can set up their own and have access like for their own staff and then use that, because I think as Bob mentioned, the way we have it set up, it facilitates bulk uploading data into our online platform. So it kind of helps with their reporting as well, but they can't report through our account, but they can report through their own accounts if they have one.
Yeah, that was a good point that I really didn't emphasize enough, is that it is designed to flow into our biotic system through another step of quality control of the data. So those 240 records that I collected, they go into a bulk upload spreadsheet. They'll go into another process called Heritage Hub, and then we approve them, review them, refine them, make sure they're all correct, and then they'll go into biotics after the data staff does their final review on them. So things really get double, triple, quadruple checked.
Excellent. I see Cooper has their hand up.
Hey there. Yeah, not really a question, a comment. I've been experimenting with using Esri's Field Maps app, which is similar to Survey 123. Not really for monitoring, but for a variety of purposes. But you talked about in the beginning of your presentation all of the drawbacks to using a phone in the field, which I find I identify with it, and I find it to be really burdensome to use a tablet or a phone in the field. And so usually I've been experimenting this year with more of a method of using the tablet just to take the geographic location or whatever geospatial information I need. And then I just do everything else on data sheets or in a notebook or something like that. And I guess enter that data later into the Esri file or ArcGIS file, which I think that's kind of, I don't know, each person has probably their own preferences, but I've found that works for me. But that, I don't know, that's not for a volunteer program. So that was just a thought.
Yeah, the Field Map app is really quite good. I started using it a little bit last year. It does suck down data, so you get hammered for that in data charges. So, and the state in its infinite wisdom does not supply us with smartphones. So you're on your own, buddy. But yeah, that's a good point. Everyone has their own taste, whether they want to enter it in a field notebook or wherever. I just much prefer entering it all into a smartphone.
Yeah, and as someone who's, I think our median age of our surveyors is 65, I can only imagine the backlash I would get if I had to tell them all that they had to use a smartphone to submit their data. But I think with technology on the rise, that soon this is the trajectory we'll be moving towards, and more volunteers will become more comfortable using cell phones, at least to record some of their data out in the field.
And I'm just going to chime into kind of on that data usage piece, and I think Bob may have mentioned it. So the Survey 123, you can use it offline. So that's kind of one of the good things, because you're, not always in area of cell phone coverage, but you can still collect data and sync it up when you have that connection, which can be really helpful. So you don't have to depend on that or burn through all of your data.
Yeah, good point, Sarah. Yeah, that's definitely true. I hardly use any data at all just for that survey approach. So
I will say too, from the information management side, I talk about a lot of the positives, but I don't do the field data collection. So the negative side of the actual practical use that Bob has highlighted is very important to weigh, because I'm just talking about from the technology side of things. It's great for these reasons, but practical application is a different story for sure.
Yes, age can definitely be a barrier for some to adapting to new technologies, Saverna. So if there aren't any other questions, I see Anna has one more question.
I have one more question. Sarah, I'm confused at what point the data security is for, because I thought that most of our programs were sending volunteers out as community science volunteers to these populations. So I know, like, we don't send our volunteers out with, like, we don't give them the entire Washington database, but we've parceled out a smaller piece. Is that just not possible with Survey 123 to be giving somebody just a limited amount of access?
So we do offer data. And we have a cooperative agreement with Micah and NPT, and the volunteers there, they all sign an agreement saying that we're giving them certain rare species plant locations that they will go out and survey for. And they have that information. They're not allowed to share that beyond NPT discussions and beyond the purposes of going to survey for those sites. And so our Survey 123, if they were to have access to it, they would have access to any of the rare plant, animal, inverts, whatever populations that any of our staff biologists are going to, which is not really covered in that data release agreement that we have. It's kind of, we disclose these certain plant populations that are targeted for a specific survey year, and we kind of refresh those annually. So it is kind of a broader dissemination of information if they were to have access to our Survey 123 projects in that sense. Just because our staff,
that really helps. Thank you.
Sure.
I see a question. Gretel was asking what programs are using Survey 123 with volunteers. We decided when we were creating our new system not to use Survey 123 because it was a third party. So sometimes we've had experience of third parties having more issues with data security if it's not managed in-house, and also just changes in the future that impact data availability and sharing. So we decided not to, but I do really see some of the benefits of using Survey 123 for our program. I'm not sure if any other programs do. Okay. I think we're running a little behind, but I'm really enjoying the discussions. I know Katie Kucera is our next presenter, but I might suggest that we take a quick 3-minute break and then maybe have people return at 2:10. The purpose of this meeting is having these discussions, so I'm incredibly grateful that we have everyone here together and can discuss these topics. So let's pause until about 2:10. Feel free to grab a drink, use the restroom, and then we will start back up. Return to our seats. We are going to start back up with Katie's presentation on the cell phone app that was developed for plants of concern.
Yeah, I also wanted to welcome Holly and Michelle, and I think David was just on here, but just dropped off. So I'm glad you're able to make it for the second half of our first meeting on data collection. Yeah, I'll start sharing my screen, and then just to give a little bit of background, like Micah mentioned, Plants of Concern was fortunate to receive a grant that allowed us to basically hire a tech firm to develop a mobile app for Plants of Concern and collecting and completing data monitoring forms. So this is available to all volunteers who participate in the Plants of Concern program, and I'll share my screen again now. Yeah, I thought Bob's presentation was really informative for me because I've never used Survey 123. So this might be a little bit repetitive in that it's kind of reviewing a mobile app, but there are some differences. So here we go. And let me know if you can't hear this. So today I'm going to walk through how to use the Plants of Concern mobile app to submit a monitoring report. So this is what the app looks like after a user signs into their Plants of Concern account on the mobile app. On the home page, the user sees all of their assignments. And today I'm going to be completing a fake monitoring report using subpop 1 of Hypericum adpressum at this site. So I'm going to go ahead and click on subpop 1. And here I can see a little bit more information about the subpop, the site where it's located, and the landowner. On this page, I can see that the latest report submitted for this subpop was in 2021. So if I wanted to review that briefly to learn a little bit more about the subpop, that information is available here. I can also click on the directions button to determine where the subpop is located and start navigating to it. And there's some more specific text directions to navigate to the subpop as well. So now I'm going to start monitoring. The first page where we start collecting data is just basic information about the date of monitoring, whether or not the subpop was found, and about the soil conditions. So I'm going to click yes, I found the subpop, and today's soil conditions are moist and well drained. The next page shows the GPS coordinates for the subpop, and this information was drawn from the previous report that was submitted in 2021. So I can make sure that those points look correct, or I can edit the GPS with more up-to-date coordinates if I desire to. But these coordinates look fine to me, so I'm going to continue on. On the next page, we enter the distance covered by the subpopulation, and this information can be calculated automatically using the GPS coordinates that are entered. So I'm going to click Use Calculated Values, and there the east-west distance in meters and the north-south distance in meters are entered automatically. This page collects information about what I'm going to be counting for the monitoring report. So for this Hypericum species, I'm going to be counting stems. This species is currently in flower, and I'm going to be doing a range estimate because I think this is a pretty large subpop. On this next page, I am going to enter the plant count range that I'm estimating and the percent reproductive of the species that I'm looking at. So in this instance, I'm estimating that there are between 401 and 800 plants, and I think they're probably about 75% reproductive. On the next page, we start entering our associate native species that are growing near this subpop or with the species that we're monitoring. I'm not going to enter any tree species, but if I were to do so, I could click on this drop-down menu or search for the species that I want to enter. And with the Plants of Concern database, we're able to enter growth form based on the USDA plants database. So only tree species will show up in this list for entering native tree associates. So it's not possible to enter a vine or an herbaceous species as a tree associate. Next, I'm going to enter the dominant native shrubs and or vine associate species that are growing with the Hypericum. So these three species were populated from the most recent report that was submitted for this subpop in 2021. And I think this list looks good, so I'm going to continue on to entering native herbaceous associates. So here are the dominant native herbaceous associates. In the Plants of Concern app, you can only enter up to 8 dominant native herbaceous plants. I think this looks good, but compared to 2021, I think I'm maybe seeing a little bit more little blue stem this year than big blue stem. So I'm going to try removing big blue stem, and that will allow me to add little blue stem as an associate. Confirm. Okay, so that associate list looks good. Now we're going to move on and enter information about invasive woody encroachment. So I'm not seeing any, or I am seeing a small amount of invasive woody brush under a meter tall, but I'm not seeing any invasive woody brush over a meter tall. And the other question on this page asks if there are invasive species outside the subpopulation not found within. So I'm going to put no. This is a pretty nice habitat, but I do think there's a little bit of honeysuckle starting to invade. That was the woody invasive shrub that I saw that was under a meter tall. So I'm going to enter honeysuckle as an invasive species at a prevalence of 1 to 20%. Okay, that looks good. This page looks at other degrees of impact for other damage that might be impacting the subpopulation. So I am seeing some deer browse, but I don't see any erosion, authorized trails, or unauthorized trails. I can also add other impacts if I want to. I'm not seeing any of these impacts, so I'm not going to be entering any of these. I don't believe there has been, now this page asks about management such as woody invasive removal, herbaceous invasive removal, or burning. I don't see any signs of woody invasive removal. I don't see any signs of an herbaceous invasive removal, but I do see signs of burning because there's no leaf litter and duff in the savanna. On this page, I can enter directions and notes about the subpop. So in this instance, I'm just going to copy directions from the report that was submitted in 2021. And I can make a note saying, for example, honeysuckle seems to be starting to invade this year. Next, I'm going to enter myself as a monitor on this report. And let's say I spent 1 hour collecting this data as the primary monitor. If I wanted to add additional monitors, I could add monitors that are entered into the plants of concern database already and search for their name. Otherwise, there's a note box for entering individuals that may have helped assist with monitoring who are not currently in the plants of concern database. On this page, I could add photos of the species from the field that I'm monitoring or other files. I'm not in the field right now, so I'm not going to be taking any photos. And then this is an overview of the different sections that I just entered the data for. So this is confirming that I've entered all the information needed and that the report looks good to submit. So I'm going to submit the report. And there we go. I successfully submitted the report. I can now close that report and it takes me back to the home page for the subpop.
and it shows that I submitted the report and that it's now in review in the Plants of Concern database. So there we go.
Okay, so that was a quick overview of the Plants of Concern mobile app for monitoring. And if anyone has any questions, Gretel or I are happy to answer them now, or we can wrap up our last presentation and have more of a discussion afterward. So.
This is Kevin from Wisconsin. I have a question. So it looked like in some of, well, first of all, that app is super slick and I'm very jealous. Two, it looks like some of the fields were populated from previous years' surveys. Is that right?
Yes.
So did you guys have to go through all those old reports and manually transcribe like every species that was seen at every site into this database? Or like, that seems really laborious. So how did you get around that, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so Plants of Concern monitors have been able to submit reports digitally since, has it been like 2013 or 2014? Gretel, do you know the year?
I don't know the year, but for a long time, people have taken, before the app, taken notes on paper forms and then entered those through our website. So our data then is mostly digital. We probably did some data entry back when we switched to that system.
Gotcha.
Any other questions for Katie? Okay.
Just to reiterate, the last slide and what Katie showed mentions that this tool is available to any project that's interested. We developed it with the intent to share it with anyone that wants to monitor rare plants. So it's open source and available. You know, we can help you set it up and store and share data with you through our database, or you know, if you have a developer that you want to hire, or you have someone available on staff to sort of take what we've created and manipulate it, change it, tweak it for your own needs, that's a possibility as well.
That's a phenomenal resource. I'm so glad that's open source. Any other questions? Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your presentation. Next, we have our final presenter, Kevin Doyle, who will be presenting on using iNaturalist to record data.
All right. Okay, so I'll be talking about our program, the rare plant monitoring programs, use of iNaturalist. A quick background on our program: we started in 2013. Initially just focused in Southwest Wisconsin, but now we're statewide. We started using iNaturalist in 2016. And then just to give a sense, I don't bring up this last point to like say, oh, woe is me, but to give a sense of our capacity to coordinate the program, it's just me working on it, and I spend about 20 or 25% of my time. So point being, we need to find, our program needed to find tools that would involve minimal work on the project coordination front. So here's our homepage for the iNaturalist project. And so we'll do a quick overview of what it looks like and then how to set one up. So if you want to submit an observation, first of all, you have to be a member of the program. I'll get into different types of programs later, but you have to be invited into the program. And once you are, or the project, I should say, and then once you are, you can add observations. On the left is a screen capture of the phone app. There you snap a picture of your plant, you give it a name, and then you can click to add it to whatever projects you're a part of. And then there's a series of fields that I added to our project that mimic our data collection form elsewhere. So we also have a fillable PDF for people that want to take forms into the field. And we use Survey 123 as well. And the fields in the iNat project mimic the fields that are in the Survey 123 or on our PDF form. And those fields are similar to what Chicago or Massachusetts showed earlier, so I won't go into too much detail on those. And then after you have filled out all those forms with your observation, you can change the location visibility or the geo privacy of your observation. And so we ask everyone to change that to either obscured or private. So the specific or the precise GPS coordinates of their rare plant observation aren't open to the public. So after the volunteer has submitted their report, they still maintain a connection to their data. And I think this is probably the most important feature of iNaturalist, at least compared with how our program's using Survey 123, or if someone sends a PDF. But let's say if they're using Survey 123, once they submit that report, they don't see it anymore. They don't, that report comes to us, but they can't see it, they can't edit it, for all they know, it just goes into a black box. Whereas on iNaturalist, you still can see all your observations. You can see other people in the project's observations. You can comment on them. You can't see the precise locational information. Only the project curator can. But, you can see the precise locations of your observations, but you can't see the precise locations of other people's reports. Only the project curator can. But anyways, you maintain that connection with your observations and with other people's observations. Okay, so for people that aren't familiar with iNaturalist, there are 3 different types of projects. There are collection projects, which are in essence a saved observation search. So these are projects that I could create, and that just iNaturalist just goes and casts a net, and all observations that meet those criteria are automatically brought into my project. You don't have to, the user doesn't have to join the project. The project just goes and grabs their observations. So if you're familiar, I know in the Midwest, there are these projects called Botanist Big Year. I don't know if they started in Illinois, but now a bunch of states do them, where they just collect all the observations of plants in a given year. That would be a collection project. An umbrella project is essentially a project that captures a bunch of collection projects. So I think the example is there's if you wanted to have one umbrella project that compared all the botanist big years for Illinois and Wisconsin and Ontario and Michigan and Indiana, and to see how the different states are collecting observations compared to each other, that would be an umbrella project. And then there's these traditional projects, which is what the Wisconsin Rare Plant Monitoring Program is. It has a few more features, a few more bells and whistles, like you can control who joins the project. You can add these observation fields, which are critical for collecting more data than just that the plant was seen. But it does take a little more outreach work because you have to invite people into the project and et cetera. Interestingly, so here's, if you log into iNat and look at their projects, it looks like there's just 2 project options. But if you're interested in one of these traditional projects, you kind of have to read the small print down at the bottom that says, if you're interested in the traditional project, use this link. So iNat doesn't really like these traditional projects anymore. I think they're trying to steer people away from them. I don't really understand why. I think they maybe take up a little more bandwidth on iNets, and they felt like people were misusing them historically. So they don't really promote them. But in my opinion, this is this feature is critical for what I'm trying to do. So anyways, if you want to start a traditional project, that's where you'd find it. To set one up, you click that link, set up your traditional project. Here, you can control who can submit observations. So our project is invite only, which means I have to get the usernames of the people that want to be into the project, and I have to invite them on iNaturalist. They can't, like a user can't request to be added. I have to invite them. So they have to email me their username. But then I can control that only members of the program can use the project. And then down here is where you'd set up your observation field. So this would be all the fields that mimic your data collection form, and you can add those. And you can set requirements for which ones are required and which ones are optional, which fields are required. From a project curator's perspective, there's a few different features. One, so you, like I said, you invite users. So everyone has to email me their username, and then I manually have to go in and invite them to the project. And once I invite them, then the next time they log in, the Rare Plant Monitoring Program project will show up in their list of projects, and they can add observations. Like I said earlier, users are asked to obscure the geoprivacy, set the geoprivacy to obscured to protect the locational information on their observations. But as the project curator, I can see the true location, which is obviously critical. And then I can export those observations in the CSV that I bring into ARC and turn into a shapefile and sort of manipulate from there. And then there's these observation fields. So this is the data field, a filled out form that a volunteer included with the report. And so I get all this information too. And then this goes into that biotics database, the NatureServe biotics database that's been mentioned a couple times already. So in summary, the pros of using iNat is, one, it's free to use and you don't have to develop an app. So we just didn't really have the resources. We use Survey 123 now, but we didn't have access to Survey 123 in 2016 when we wanted some kind of app to use, and a lot of people were using this. So it's kind of meeting people where they're at. The obscuring the precise information, locational information is great. Adding fields that mimic the data collection form is great. And then, like I said earlier, I think the best part of iNat is that users can continue to see their data and they can interact with other people, other volunteers. They can see what other people are reporting. They can comment on identifications and stuff like that. So it kind of helps build community a little bit better. On the other hand, the cons are you need a username and a password. So this is one of the downsides, that it's just another thing for people to remember, when we're teaching people about the program. Take this training and here are the rules and blah, blah. And then, when it comes to submitting data, go over here. And then you need to create a username and password. And if there are issues with iNat, I don't have any control on what's going on with iNat. So that's kind of a pain. Like I said, you need to manually invite, as a curator, I need to manually invite volunteers to the project. Only observers can obscure locational information for their data. So I can't go in as the project curator and obscure other people's observations. And then this last point is probably the biggest con, in my opinion, of iNat, is that you can't submit negative data. So with rare plant surveys, of course, a lot of it's going to be negative data. They just didn't find what they were looking for, and there's nothing you can do with that on iNaturalist. So it's not, probably because of that, more so than anything else, you can't use this as your only source of data collection. But it is a good tool. Yeah, it is a good tool for a lot of cases. Right now, I was just doing a review of all our data over the years, and on average, about a quarter to a third of our observations come in through iNat every year. About 40 to 45% come in through Survey 123, and then like 20 to 25% come in through other, whether that's through hard PDFs or if it's just emails, sort of loose emails, comments and emails. So it does make up a decent amount of data. And again, it's people that were already using this tool are usually the ones that are submitting the most data. And I think that's all I've got. So if anyone has any questions.
Did you, I may have missed the screen, but do you limit the taxa that they can report to your listed species or a set list?
No, that's a good point though. You can, that's one of the tools. Let's see if I should. Project list here, you can see right above the red circle. You could create, my understanding is you could create a list that would limit what people can report on. I didn't do that. And so I will get some observations every year from people that aren't things that we're tracking. So ideally our program is only looking at endangered, threatened, and special concern species, but theoretically people could submit observations on anything. It ends up not being a big problem.
How many people are in the project now?
Let's look. Like 62 people have submitted observations. A bunch more have been invited to the project, but then haven't submitted.
And then do some of the observations not truly identifiable to species level or to subspecies if that's needed?
Yeah, there's been a couple over the years where it's like, I'm not sure about this ID, and then so I just don't map it. We keep the record. It stays on iNaturalist. So if there's some time in the future, maybe they revisit the site and we confirm that that's what it was, then I can retroactively add that observation. But yeah, for people who aren't familiar with iNat, that's a big part of it, is that there's sort of crowdsourced identification. And so someone could theoretically submit an observation of an incorrectly identified thing, and then we all chime in and say, oh yeah, that was incorrectly identified. Or they say, I think it's this species, but I'm not sure what variety. And then someone chimes in and says, oh yeah, that's the rare variety. I can tell because of the glandular hairs on the stem or whatever. So sometimes, yeah, we sort of work our way towards an identification.
Yeah, I think that's even with pretty good botanists, I find a lot of them don't really take enough of the photos that are required really to fully identify it just based on photographs alone. They might take only the flowers, and you need the leaves or the stem, or you need some indication of stature, or like you just mentioned, glandular hairs or something. And just so often people use a phone and then they try to focus on the plant, and it focuses on whatever's behind them, and they submit that, and you really can't see. There's a lot of tricks to doing good photographs that can be truly identifiable. And I think I guess you don't have a big group, so you could keep training them. But right. I think that would be one of our problems in Massachusetts, is just didn't meet the qualifications of a really good observation.
Well, to clarify, I mean, that's an issue of regardless of what platform you're sharing the data, you're going to deal with the problem of not being able to identify species. So whether you use Survey 123 or email or whatever, or iNat, you're going to run into that problem.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I know in our training, I spend about maybe 5 to 10 minutes talking about tips and suggestions for taking diagnostic photos of plants, including bringing rulers with you to have in the photo, having some kind of blank background to put behind diagnostic features. But I was wondering, do other programs kind of have trainings on that, or have resources for how to take diagnostic photos? Ooh.
Wisconsin does not. Like you, I sort of mentioned it in trainings, like a couple tips and tricks, but no, nothing more than that.
Yeah, I like Saverna's comment about hosting a taxonomic photography course. If you have a video, we would love to see that. If you could share that with us, that would be amazing. And Anna, ooh.
This is Cooper. We have a page on our website that has some guidance on how to take photos for iNaturalist. I'll see if I can find that and put it in the chat.
If you could share those resources, I think pooling some of that information would be incredibly helpful, because I think that really is one of the most difficult aspects of rare plant community science, is just making sure that the correct species was identified, not another variety. That was a really helpful presentation. Any other questions for Kevin?
Micah, I would just add,
Yeah.
onto the photographic, like how do we take pictures? And I think it's essential and not easily solvable, but an area needs to have a functional flora and key for a lot of those. That would be the easiest way to direct somebody for how to take a picture. Some of those last components in that key would be the points to direct them to, but a lot of states and regions don't have current floras or keys that would be a quick place to turn folks to. So no easy fix.
Absolutely. Yeah. Trying to every time I tell them you need to include diagnostic features and take clear diagnostic features, and every year we get at least one person who will put under the diagnostic features section white flowers, because it's the only plant in existence that has white flowers. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that presentation. So I know we're a little bit behind, but that is quite all right. And if people need to jump off at any point, that's totally fair. I think the rest of the time we had allotted was just really for open discussion and to discuss some questions people might have. I know we sent some kind of pre-thought up questions if we'd like to discuss that, but if anyone has any other discussion questions they'd like to introduce to the group before we dive into those, this is the time for it. I think this is just open discussion. Anna.
I was wondering, do other programs, it sounds like there's a bit of emphasis on like using your data and get into biotics, but do other programs create reports for your land managers? I create a PDF of every single monitoring report that the volunteers do, and as I'm like thinking through all these more digital ways, I'm like, I don't want to lose that product that we create for the land managers, and I'm curious how other people do that. And yeah.
I can speak to that for plants of concern. We have the ability for land managers to log in and see all of the rare plant monitoring that's done on their sites, and a way to download the data by, spreadsheet format or by individual monitoring report format. So they can download PDFs, they can download KMLs, or CSV Excel files.
I can speak for our program. We had our software volunteer and our software team basically create a page for us on our website for admins to use that basically will generate phrases and send a create like drafted email with an inset phrase that says who the surveyors were, whether or not the plants were found, if they were found, how many, and what phenology, and the dates. So generally, these are actually on 2 pages, one for if populations were found and one for if it's not, because there's different kind of syntax to generating those fields. So sometimes people get 2 emails if they have a bunch of populations on their property. But that's kind of how we do it so far, is those we created a web page that will generate the information, so you can just click a button and email them.
And just to follow up on, Kevin mentioned how volunteers like to see what they've done. And if some platforms, like if you submit something, it automatically disappears. We have way that volunteers have their own account and they can log in and see all of the reports that they have submitted in the past. So their whole monitoring history.
And they, as well as the landowner, receive an email once the report is submitted saying that there's like an email record saying that the report was submitted successfully.
That's really awesome. I really would like to follow up with you guys after telling my supervisor about all these different things.
Yeah, I didn't know that for iNaturalist, you could create projects for landowners to view and contribute to. I'm guessing the landowners kind of have the same access as the volunteers if you create an account for them. Let's comment on that.
In Arkansas, we have, it's just a collection project based on shape files of the natural areas, so that any observations that are created on natural areas automatically get added to that project. It can be a little challenging if the area of uncertainty extends beyond the property boundary. Those don't always make it in. And for those federally endangered, federally listed species don't make it in either because of the data obscuration.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Kevin mentioned this in his presentation, but for people who don't know, I think it's still pretty easy unless there's more restrictions as iNaturalist has grown, but it's easy to create places manually. Like all you need is a shapefile. I think, yeah, either in, I don't know what formats, but KML or shapefiles, and then you just upload it to their system and you can give it any name that you want. So even probably for private property owners, you can just use their name or whatever information they're comfortable with sharing. I think that's correct. If anyone who knows, correct me if I'm wrong, but
it is a KMZ, I think, okay, not KML, and you have to limit the number of shards and sharp corners.
Okay.
Bob, you raised your hand.
Yeah, for the people that are working with iNaturalist on, so in Arkansas and Chicago and Wisconsin, and maybe more, how is the time in terms of your staff time working out? Because so let's say going back to Arkansas, you have these shapefiles and it's a collector project, everything's coming in. How much of your staff time needs to go to sifting through the data that's could be pouring in or trickling in?
We actually haven't had an opportunity to do much with our collection projects for the natural areas. It's one of those things that as long as we're gathering the data, it's there.
Yeah.
Our botany staff right now is a staff of one. Our entire research department is 6 people.
Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of the resources of some of the larger states. So far with iNaturalist, we've been more interested in exporting observations of rare taxa. So we actually did a data poll using just expert identifications from botanist IDs, so that we had a good data set to work with, and we're evaluating 1,188 records. I'm not sure how much, I know the last time I presented about that was a couple of weeks ago, and they had gotten through 62% of the data. But for that, it was 152 taxa, 68 county records of rare taxa, and there are going to be over 400 new EOs created. A lot of updated EOs, some of which were almost 100 years old. So it has been an incredible resource for us and is making a big impact on our heritage data.
But who's evaluating those and how long did it take? I mean, you say you have a staff of 1, so who's doing the evaluation?
We've dwindled. So technically our chief of research is also a botanist, and we had another botanist who left last April. So, I mean, iNat is a passion for us. This is something we do in nights and weekends. Like I know during our Native Plant Society meetings, somebody will be off in the corner, like flipping through iNat stuff if they've seen the presentation before. It's not, we don't really quantify it on work hours because we don't have the bandwidth for it. If we were
There's a-
driving
there's a
together
risk
to a
there.
field site, the person who wasn't driving was usually doing identifications.
Yeah, I would never do that. But Kevin, can you add to that, Kevin, in terms of your time?
Yeah, well, our project is very different than what it sounds like Arkansas is in that it's a traditional project. So that we're limiting the number of people that are involved. So that helps the workload. And then on top of that, because we have these observation fields, the data that we're getting out of it is much greater than a typical collection project where you're just seeing that it occurs there.
Yeah.
So one, the workload is less. The workload is basically the same as it is. Like I said, we're getting data through Survey 123 as well, and I wouldn't say I spend any more time on iNat than I do on Survey 123 in terms of processing the records. Again, because we're limiting the number of people that we're selecting, the number of the kinds of people who are making observations. It's not just, and we're requiring more information out of them, so it's not too bad at all.
Chicago folks?
I'll chime in and say we don't currently have like a workflow for using iNaturalist because we have our own mobile monitoring app. But we have some, collaborators with plants of concern who are really iNaturalist savvy. And so we've explored like mining iNaturalist to ADIOs and things like that. But we haven't really like completed that. But someone who has worked a bit with plants of concern in the past, like, sent us an exported file with all these observations, and we have that as a resource. I just think Illinois, like where we're operating is like, obviously there's always more to be found, but it's pretty well botanized, and we have a lot of historic records, and I don't know like how much we would gain from really diving into iNaturalist, but I'm sure there are some populations that we would add that we don't know about. It's just not something we've like explored thoroughly yet.
Yeah, and same with Native Plant Trust. We don't currently do anything with iNaturalist or really encourage botanists to use iNaturalist. We rather them submit their data through us. But I think we have had discussions about whether the states have relationships with iNaturalist, where if a rare plant species is confirmed or reported and reviewed in a state, whether that data is actually shared with the state natural heritage program. So trying to make sure that data isn't just going into the void, but seeing who has the authority to kind of connect with iNaturalist to get that data. I think definitely as a nonprofit organization, iNaturalist would be less likely to share records if it wasn't contributed by Native Plant Trust. So that's probably the workflow we're looking towards.
There are a lot of challenges for working with iNaturalist and having the exchange of information and data and even taxonomy between heritage programs and iNaturalist. So NatureServe is actually interested in being a voice for the heritage programs collectively to try to build a better workflow and system for that. Canada has a lot of controls. They have a larger bandwidth, and they are able to use iNaturalist amazingly to get rare plant records. And it's something that's a little bit harder, I think, because of the variation in the heritage programs from state to state, or from like the Navajo Nation. Not everything is a state heritage program, so it's challenging.
I had a question. So there are a lot of different ways for submitting data. As a program where we have multiple surveyors going on a survey, I'm curious for especially with cell phone apps, if there's the ability to edit your data once you've submitted it. So with Sprout, we're testing a new feature where one person is responsible for submitting their data on a specific page. But once it's been submitted, there's a second page called Field Data Edit, where surveyors who are mentioned in the field form, so listed as additional surveyors, can go in and review the data that's been submitted and continue making changes. I was wondering if that's a feature, or if once it's submitted, if there's some complication that they have to the surveyors have to contact the program coordinators to change it.
That's basically how it works with Wisconsin with Survey 123. Once they submit it, they can't edit it. So if they have an issue, they have to email me directly and communicate those changes. With iNat, it's a good question. I don't think you can edit the observation field after you've submitted the observation. I'm not sure about that. Of course, you can change the ID. You could, I'm sure, change the location. I know you can change the location, but I don't know if you can change those observation fields. You definitely can't with Survey 123 though.
Yeah, we're similar, Micah. Once the data is submitted, it's not available to edit. So it's contacting program coordinators to make any changes, but it's viewable. So you can see that you need to make changes.
Yeah, this has been very experimental, because sometimes we'll have different surveyors are better at different aspects. So one person will be in charge of taking the map, one will do the photos, and then rather than trying to coordinate who submits it at the end, one person can at least enter the minimal fields, and then other surveyors can add to that. That has opened the Pandora's box of someone changing the data without telling other people, and then getting people all upset about who's overriding my data. But that's something we've been testing out. So I was curious if anyone else had been.
For Massachusetts, in terms of like the Survey 123 forms that our staff use, and Bob can speak to this too, there's certainly that like collection that happens in the field, and then they can go back and edit it at home, which I think he touched on a little bit. But we have a second step, as Micah is intimately aware of, getting it into Heritage Hub, our online application reporting. And so once it's submitted there, it's locked for editing. You can create a report, you can leave it in draft mode and edit it as much as you want. But once we submit it, that's when our like internal workflow starts. We don't really want people editing it anymore, because then it could change our determination of how we're evaluating that record. So it's kind of why we do lock it down, but we can open it back up for editing. So yeah, that's just kind of our take on it. And I'd be curious with like the NPT folks and how you're, there are collaborators on a single form, like who decides when it's done, and like what the final, like kind of what you're saying of like, what's the final say of what are we reporting in that field? And do you get a consensus, or is it at some point they, those two roads split and we've got two forms coming in for the same population because they couldn't come to an agreement on what they should be reporting? I'm curious there.
So far, we haven't quite gotten to that point. I think I've made it a new part of the training where if you are planning to make changes to a document, please make sure to communicate that with the rest of your group, so we don't have unilateral changes, drastic changes to a report. And then basically, in terms of deadline, I instruct the surveyors of when to have all of their survey reports. So I usually create a deadline of early November to have everything submitted, and then we will start reviewing and accepting those those reports. And then at some point in kind of late November, start of December, we really close down everything and kind of process all of the data. So basically they have anywhere, if they have surveys starting in April, they have from April all the way till early November to get all of their reports in and make changes. I didn't see in some of the field forms, there were places to submit additional kind of dates if you conducted multiple surveys for a site. We've actually, while we've allowed people to update their survey reports, we are trying to dissuade people from actually including information from multiple surveys in a single form. So generally, we say that if it's been more than a week since you have visited a site and you return to that site, that they submit an additional report for that population, especially with phenology changing. Before our new system, we would have field forms that were mailed to us that had survey dates from September through October and then list phenology, and I've got no idea when that phenology was for. So we actually suggest that our surveyors submit multiple reports for every time they go out and visit, with the reminder that we have a requirement of just 8 fields to fill out, and the rest is supplemental material. So we try and suggest that in the future, or for our surveyors to do that.
Micah, going back to your mention of having multiple folks contribute on a form, I wonder if it would be kind of a way to avoid conflict and get a consensus of having the primary observer fill out the form, and then other folks who are there could edit it, but that primary person needs to be the one to like accept those changes before doing that final submit of like, my name is the one on this saying this is what we agreed as a group, like having like that last, I'm the person who's giving the all clear to go ahead, like approving those sorts of changes. I wonder if that would facilitate some of that.
Yeah, so far we haven't had too many issues with people changing their data. I think we only heard from one person who was a little upset that they just didn't hear when someone was doing that. So we are right now, we don't have plans to change that system, but definitely if this becomes a bigger issue, we will definitely maybe change it so that while other people could view the form, they may not be able to edit, and only the lead surveyor on that survey or the main surveyor could make those changes. Right now, I'm hopeful that our surveyors will be able to coordinate with each other and have a consensus, but we'll see. This is very much in its trial phase. So we made it through 1 year and about 800 forms. So hopefully it'll be good going forward, and botanists can work together.
I will quickly add that in our mobile app, there's a feature where you can send your report to the website to edit later. So if you wanted to type in like long notes about how to access the site or the subpopulation, you don't have to use the phone text like to enter that.
To move us to another question, I think we had sent out a question of if there were fields that you're not currently collecting but are interested in potentially collecting in the future. I know I mentioned that we weren't collecting a field specifically for difficulty to communicate that to surveyors. I was curious what other people were thinking and if there were fields you were contemplating. I saw, I was really curious, I think Washington, their field form had a section on pollinators. That I thought was really interesting. And I know we've been thinking more about plants on a landscape and interacting and plant interactions. So having pollinator information would be really interesting to have.
So for me, that's that would be an area where iNaturalist could really be helpful, because a lot of times I see bumblebees pollinating some of our rare species. They're often generalists, but I can't ID them necessarily accurately, but other people certainly can. And sometimes some of the native the other bees, the halictid bees and others, and various wasps they can identify, but I sure can't. But you know, you can get a shot, and if the collective project was set up right in some way, and I'm not sure how to do that, but you know, you could pull that information in, and then you know, over time, as people, usually the entomologists take a while to get around to identify. It could be 6 months later, but usually it'll get identified, the bumblebees and some of the other ones. So that would be a really good use for it. And I have posted on iNaturalist and got some ID'd that way. But I haven't, I mean, we don't, most of them, they're generalist pollinators, so we don't have a way to collect or a reason to collect that information per se.
A field that I noticed and that I sort of wanted to ask other programs about, which is maybe a little bit more basic, but just isn't part of our workflow right now, at least in Northeast Illinois, is the field about collecting voucher specimens or depositing specimens in herbaria after like from a population that you're surveying. And I believe Chris has done some of that in Southern Illinois. I don't know if those are from plants of concern monitored populations, but I wondered like how if collecting is a part of a lot of programs protocols still, like is that something people are doing often during surveys, or like what % of surveys do you also collect a voucher specimen for? Because I would say we don't do any of that in Northeast Illinois, and it's not a question that we ask as part of our monitoring form. So. Chris, I think you're muted.
Chris, you're muted.
Thank you. It has to do with permitting, honestly, and it's kind of tricky. We've talked about this in Illinois, where it would be nice if, particularly at the DNR, they do not issue like a blanket permit for collecting on all their sites. They want to know what you want to collect where, and of course that'd be hard to put into place for everything. A lot of the reason I made a lot of collections in the Shawnee National Forest was because I was able to get a blanket permit for collecting on National Forest sites as long as it's not in a research natural area. We have talked about with the Natural History Survey in Illinois and others that it would be really great to have a select few identified by DNR that are allowed to have these blanket collecting permits, but that's one of the big challenges.
It's the same in Wisconsin. It's a permitting issue, so it's hard to, it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell, to be honest. Like if I know that if people are like, well, I'm just not sure about this plant, and I'll just sort of say, we'll collect it and we'll figure it out. But you can't give that guidance across the board.
Yeah, Kevin, since you're responding, I guess I'm not very familiar with this event, but I know that the Wisconsin Botanical Club, I don't know what the name is, but I know that they have like a foray annually and make a lot of collections. I don't know. Yeah.
So the Wisconsin so those events, the botanical forays, are put on by the Wisconsin State Herbarium, which is on UW-Madison, and the Botanical Club, which is our Native Plant Society.
Okay.
And the State Herbarium has one of those blanket permits that Chris was talking about, so they can collect whatever they want, wherever they want, essentially, and not on private land, of course, but without landowner permission. So they have that permit, and that's kind of like an umbrella for all those groups that go out. Someone in that group has one of those permits. So
got it.
In Massachusetts, I do collect sometimes if there's good population numbers, and if I think the ID is at all difficult. Usually I'm collecting associates, and I have a blanket permit, so I can collect even on private land if I need to. Yeah, and I'm actually in our lab, I'm building up a collection of all our state listed species. So I'll collect some if sometimes you get to a site and an animal has sheared off a plant right at the base and it's just lying there ready to be picked up, and not gonna grow anymore. So I'll generally grab those. We have even some of the federally listed plants collected that way. So, so I have a kind of a nice project going. I only have one herbarium case, but it's not full yet, and I should be able to get all the listed species in there over time.
That brings up another challenge with the collecting is preparing specimens, and they can take quite a long time to curate. And I was actually able to team up with the University of Illinois Extension Service that has master naturalists and master gardeners who have to maintain a certain number of hours volunteering. And so this is another way to get people involved. In fact, most of the people doing this sort of thing are not of the physical ability where they can really do plant monitoring, so they feel like they can still contribute. And they've done 200, I think, of the 300 collections that I've had in the last few years. So that is a huge help, and I probably couldn't collect as many as I do without their help.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have one volunteer that comes in once a week sometimes, but I should probably try to reach out to get another.
Yeah, and I know we have, we're currently trying to catalog and digitize our herbarium and pressed specimens collection that we have. Voucher specimens, now with our ability to take really high quality photos and the legal ramifications of collecting potentially rare plant species, we do not advocate that our surveyors collect voucher specimens. I think generally our PCVs absolutely almost never have, I don't think I've ever heard of them collecting a voucher specimen. As I mentioned, we have through NEPCOP our task force, which is state and professional botanists. I think they may be more likely, especially since we have a senior research botanist. If there's a really tricky species ID, someone will sometimes take a sample and send it to Arthur to identify. But generally, we're trying to really move towards taking good quality diagnostic photos so we can confirm it without having to damage the population.
So Crataegus is a genus where you can usually snip off the branch without harm, and they're really difficult to ID by photographs. So that's one where we have made some collections. We have a couple listed, several listed species.
So we're about 10 minutes past our time. I'm loving this discussion and being able to hear what everyone else is doing. As someone who has now been a part of this program for 3 years, it still feels like I'm trying to figure all of this out for myself. So it's good to see others. But I think so we are planning to have more meetings in the future on different topics such as data management. I think landowner interactions will likely be its own meeting, and seeing how programs get permissions and organize those permissions. But please stay tuned. We will be sending out an email in the next week or so with some resources that were discussed during this meeting, as well as the recording link. Also, if you are interested in joining the kind of leadership committee to discuss what topics we discuss next, and also start thinking about the broader functions of this network and what kind of materials we can produce, please feel free to email myself, Katie, Gretel, Bob. But it's wonderful to see all of you, and thank you so much for participating in this. I really
Amanda too.
Oh, and Amanda, sorry, you're on there too. But yeah, feel free to email the group. But it's wonderful to see everyone so passionate about protecting these species and getting us all together to start talking about how we can share our knowledge and tools to better do our jobs.
Yeah, thanks much for organizing and hosting today.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
It's good to see everyone. See you next time. And thanks to everyone who uploaded their data collection forms. I like looking at those.
Great meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Gretel, Katie, if you want to, oh, I lost a couple people, but yeah, if you want to stay on for a second.
Sure.